Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. The Yukon government has confirmed there's evidence of cyanide contamination at the Eagle Gold Mine after an equipment failure last week which caused a landslide. All 4 groundwater samples collected near the mine site indicate evidence of cyanide. Officials say a sample collected from a creek near the mine shows elevated levels of cyanide at 0.04 milligrams per liter, levels that could potentially impact fish. The government says it will continue to conduct water quality testing and sampling. The mine is located 85 kilometers from the community of Mayo, which is the home of the First Nation of Nacho-Nayakdun. The First Nation is calling for all mining activity on its traditional territory to be halted because of the incident. Yukon Mines Minister John Stryker says the government is doing its best to address the situation.
We understand the seriousness of the heap leach failure at the Eagle Gold Mine on Monday, June 24th. We all love this place we call home. We all share a responsibility to safeguard it for future generations. That includes our government, Victoria Gold, and everyone else who has the honor to explore and occupy this incredible territory. Many of us have questions, and of course, we want immediate answers.
The mine's owners, Victoria Gold, have temporarily suspended operations. The company said in a release just prior to the government announcement that it had found no evidence of cyanide in its sampling. Officials say results can sometimes vary. An update to a story we brought you earlier in the week. Leadership at the Kihewin Cree Nation in Alberta held a membership vote on Wednesday to change their election laws to allow chief and council to have 3 consecutive terms instead of 2, and to allow the term length to go from 3 to 4 years. A low voter turnout saw a 154 to 58 vote to keep leadership terms at 3 years, and 124 votes for keeping term limits at 2 consecutive terms versus 74 votes to expand terms to 3 years. The voting age will go from 18 to 21, and voters decided to lower the number of councillors from 7 to 5. There was no vote on allowing members to be electoral officers. The election for the 2,200 member band, 240 kilometers northeast of Edmonton, will be held before the end of summer. If being a premier was a popularity contest, Wab Kinew would come out on top, according to new approval ratings data. 66% of Manitobans polled approve of the rookie premier's work so far. Sav Jones went out on the street to see what people are saying.
2/3 of Manitobans think that Premier Wab Kinew is doing a good job, according to the latest approval data from the Angus Reid Institute. The first provincial premier of First Nations descent is leading the pack against other provincial premiers for the 3rd time in a row. Since his election in October 2023, Premier Kinew has topped every approval rating polling conducted by the nonpartisan Public Opinion Research Foundation. And each time, his increasing numbers secured him as one of only 2 provincial premiers with an over 50% approval rating from his residents. We went out on the town to see what people, Indigenous and non-Indigenous alike, are thinking about his term so far. Premier Wab Kinew just got a 66% approval rating. He's the highest approved premier of all the provinces. What do you think of Premier Wab Kinew?
What do I think of Premier Wab Kinew? I like how he is involved with the community in Winnipeg and around Manitoba. I like that he's involved with the youth and really showing out and like being out there with the kids too.
Yeah, I haven't, to be honest, been following him super closely since he was elected, but I really appreciate having a first Indigenous premier, and yeah, it strikes me as a situation where we have a leader who's engaged with the community to a certain degree, and I appreciate that.
No, Wab Kinew's great. He's doing good things for our province.
That's awesome.
Go Uncle Wabby!
I'm one of the 66%.
Yeah?
I think he's done lots. I think he listens to people. I think especially with all the searching the landfills, talking to the families, Like, I just think those are promises he made and he's following through on them. I see he's got such a diverse cabinet. And I really appreciate and respect that as well.
Last month, Kinew announced the process for searching the Prairie Green landfill north of Winnipeg has begun, a promise he made during his election after incumbent Heather Stephenson refused. He and others in Winnipeg hope the search will uncover the remains of at least 2 First Nations women believed to have been dumped there after being murdered by an admitted serial killer. Kinew has also suspended the provincial fuel tax, which he says has given Manitoba the lowest gas prices in the country.
While only 9 months into his first term as a premier, still a lot could change in the coming months. But for now, it's an achievement to be proud of. Sav Jones, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
Thanks, Sav. On Tuesday, Métis Nation Saskatchewan cut the ribbon on the new Dumont Lodge. The facility will help Métis children and youth have the opportunity to learn traditions, learn from elders, and take pride in their culture. Video journalist Rachel May was at the grand opening.
This lodge it's a building, but it's going to be a home. It's going to be a home for us. It's our first real home that we've built, in the Métis Nation.
July 3rd, the ribbon was cut on the new Dumont Lodge, located on the sacred grounds of Batoche. The new $8 million facility was made possible by MNS partnering with Urban Programming for Indigenous Peoples, a program implemented by Indigenous Services Canada to help deliver culturally appropriate programming. Vice President of Métis Nation Saskatchewan, Michelle Leclerc, says that this is so much more than just a building.
It's a home for our youth to learn about culture, language, values.
With construction finished, MNS spoke about their new program for youth, the Riel Scouts. The program will teach youth from ages 5 to 18 Métis practices, language, and traditions. MNS President Glenn McCallum says that with the help of elders, MNS executives, and citizens, the lodge will provide a safe place to learn traditions youth might not otherwise experience.
Everybody has a role. To be able to build good spirits as individuals, to be able to build good communities, to be able to build good cities, to be able to build a good province, and to build a country that we all feel that we're a part of.
The exact details of the Riel Scouts program are still being worked out, but the first set of Scouts should be coming in early 2025. Meanwhile, the Dumont Lodge will be available for tours, rentals, and will act as the Elders Lodge during the Back to Batoche Festival. McCallum says the lodge is also a place to reflect on how far Métis people have come.
The reality of who we are needs to be recognized, but more importantly, in regards to the struggles that we have had as Métis people.
Rachel May, APTN National News, Saskatoon.
The special interlocutor on missing children and unmarked graves says a history of genocide and mass human rights breaches have been buried in archives and hidden from the public eye. We'll speak with Kimberly Murray after the break. Welcome back. The histories of the cemeteries at former Indian residential schools are evidence of genocide and mass human rights violations. That is just one of the conclusions in a new report by the Special Interlocutor on Unmarked Graves and Missing Children. This historical report by Kimberly Murray comes just a few months ahead of the planned release of her final report. She joins us now from Toronto. Kim, thanks for joining us. This is an exhaustive report, more than 200 pages. As I mentioned in the intro, one of the conclusions is that these cemeteries at former Indian residential schools are evidence of genocide and mass human rights violations. Can you talk more about that?
Absolutely. And first off, I just want to point out that survivors have been saying this for decades. And the Truth and Reconciliation actually put all the evidence in volume 4 of their final report. What I wanted to do with this report was to show the evidence by putting the images of the historical documents, the photos of the cemeteries, the photos of the maps that show that they existed. Because all of this evidence of genocide and mass human rights breaches have been buried in archives and hidden from the public eye. So it was really important that we put it out there so that Canadians can see for themselves.
Yeah, you know, this is a big report, lots of documents, historical records and photos, some showing children working in graveyards. Why was that something you wanted to include?
I mean, it was a very difficult decision whether to include those highly sensitive documents or images. And after speaking with survivors and elders, they said it was really important to put the truth out there. Really important for Canadians to be able to see this evidence for themselves.
The report also mentions a lack of care given to Indigenous children in their lives that residential schools had carried over to their deaths, where money was often a factor. Can you talk more about that?
Absolutely. It was the driving force of the government to keep costs down. And so it was their direct policy that they would not send the children back home for burial if they died. And that happened not just in the Indian residential schools, but with all the other institutions that I identify in the report. They buried the children in common graves. They are buried in mass graves. And I put that evidence in the report where we see the invoices, we see the letters from the Indian agents. We see the conversations between the churches and the federal government on how the children were not to be returned home. And we know from survivors and families and communities that they were not notified of the deaths and they were not told where the children are buried.
Yeah, you mentioned that the actions and failures to act by the government and the church created this crisis of disappeared children and unmarked graves that survivors and families and communities are still facing today. You also mentioned that there's about 150 of these searches currently underway, and that this will be going on for years, and not just residential school sites, right? There's other institutions.
Yes, absolutely. Other institutions, the Indian hospitals, the TB sanatorium, reformatories, homes for unwed mothers. These are all institutions that the records show children were transferred from the Indian residential schools to these other institutions where they died. Unfortunately, right now, Canada and the provinces are not funding or providing support to communities to search these other institutional grounds. And so I'm calling on the federal government to expand the scope of the funding so communities can actually trace and find the children and have them brought home if they wish. I mean, I can bring you to the attention of one of the children, Percy, that I identify in Chapter 3. He's buried in southern Ontario, and his family is fighting with both the federal and provincial government to have him exhumed to bring him back home. And neither of the governments have stepped up to support the family in that request.
Kimberly, just again, a lot of work here that you've done. It's quite the read. Hope people read it. I appreciate the work you're doing, and thank you for the time today.
Thank you.
Our Truth and Politics panel is here now to discuss the latest report by the special interlocutor. Niigaan Sinclair is the columnist with the Winnipeg Free Press, and Jennifer Leywitz is a policy analyst based in Saskatchewan. Niigaan, Jennifer, thanks for being with us. Niigaan, this report concludes, among many other things, that the histories of cemeteries at former Indian residential school sites are evidence of genocide and mass human rights violations. Your thoughts on some of the findings here?
The UN Genocide Convention, adopted in 1948, uses a number of criteria to define genocide, and the third within the article is the removal of, the fifth actually, the forcible removal of children from one group to another. Then of course there's the intentional harm of the members of a group. The debate has always been around the mental intent, because the physical intent is evident. What this report does is it shows photographs of church members, leaders, priests, with children in cemeteries, children most oftentimes handling the deaths of their classmates, either burying or carrying their coffin. Fortunately, the faces were blurred out so that there's some consideration of survivors. But that shows evidence that there was mental awareness of harming of children in the schools, and that it just simply continued. And so if you were to watch someone being harmed and do nothing about it, then you are complicit in that harm. And that shows a mental intent to harm children. So not only were their children forcibly removed, but they were also mentally intended to be harmed. So that absolutely shows evidence of genocide. It should be no more debate, and this report illustrates this.
Jennifer, as somebody who's pretty active on social media, you no doubt see a lot of this denialism out there. The special interlocutor mentioned she hoped this new historical report will combat some of that denialism. Do you think that will do just that?
Unfortunately, I would like to hope for the best, but unfortunately, I don't think so. I think that there is a real serious problem out there of people that carry these biases and stereotypes and deep-rooted hate for our people naturally, and with that comes just denying any atrocities that our people have faced. And unfortunately, residential school denialism is on the rise, and the people that are championing the conversation around this are bringing the people in. I think we need to look at the fact that the truth has been outlined in the TRC report. It's also been transferred through our oral history and our knowledge that's been shared with us. And I think at the end of the day, one of the biggest things that I notice is you'll go on social media and people say, well, there's been talks about mass graves, and they really get into the nitty-gritty of talking about the terminology used. But at the end of the day, we are our own people with our own customs, beliefs, and cultural practices. And, when there was the jawbone that was found in Saskatchewan at Star Blanket Cree Nation, I saw on social media that they were given strict instruction from the knowledge keepers and elders to put that jawbone back in the ground. And there's also been talk that if there is any potential bodies in the ground, to leave them alone, because we view death very differently than other cultures. And I feel like that respect and that patience is not given to us to navigate this as we see fit. And unfortunately, I think we're going to continue dealing with residential school denialism, and there's going to be a real effort for us to combat that.
Right. Nigan, the final report on missing children and unmarked graves will come this fall. What do you think the hopes are for that report?
Hope is that there'll be a real commitment to commemoration, or their call for a commitment to commemoration. The fact is that Jennifer's right. If there were to be exhumations, which I highly believe is unlikely, it's more DNA study of soil. You're not going to, anyone who expects to find exhumations or bodies dug up is simply just macabre or just doesn't understand science. The fact is that these children were inappropriately buried most oftentimes, and we are talking about burials that took place over half a century ago. So it really is no body to exhume. What we're looking for is essentially a needle in a haystack to be able to pull up evidence within children or the evidence of these cemeteries. So the hope would be is that there would be an appropriate measure or further commitment to be able to analyze where children are buried, because the reality is that communities need to know where their children are buried. They need to be able to commemorate those spaces. And as I wrote in a column, for our ceremonial purposes, death for us, for Indigenous peoples, is a beginning. Part of what we have to do in that burial ceremony is help our relatives to be able to head to the west. There's certain instructions, certain protocols that have to be followed in order to assist our relatives to head in that direction. So that ceremony has to take place in order to release the spirits to be able to head in that direction. That's just a part of what this report needs to do, is to be able to further commit to help communities to heal from this terrible atrocity.
Jennifer, as we're continuing to see with the TRC more than a decade ago now, the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, getting action on these recommendations is difficult. Do you think this will be any different?
I think it will continue to be difficult. I think anytime it comes to any of these issues, it's a fight, and our advocates across the country are putting in so much work to just be heard and have these actions taken seriously. My hope is that it isn't going to be difficult, but there's a number of big things that have been going on. We have our lobbying body through the AFN currently going through what they're going through, and there's some stuff happening there, and that's going to prove to be difficult for getting that national voice. We're expecting a change in government next year. What's that going to look like? Is the funding going to continue coming to our communities across the country that are trying to do those reports and that ground penetrating radar? And then what does the healing process look like from that as well?
Jennifer Negon, we'll leave it there. Appreciate your time this week.
Yeah, we watch.
Decades of negotiations have yielded a new provincial park on the East Coast. Details after the break. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. Dorothy Ratch shared with us some sunny skies from the Kootenays in British Columbia, where there's been lots of sunshine these past few days. Jealous, thanks, Dorothy. If you have a picture to share, send that photo to share@aptn.ca for the chance to be our next photo of the day. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the East Coast, 27 in Charlottetown, showers, and 24 in Halifax. 13 with rain in Kuujjuaq, 15 in Nain. 30 in Montreal, 21 for Val-d'Or. Showers and 22 in Sault Ste. Marie, cloudy and 25 for North Bay. 23 in Thunder Bay, 1 degree warmer in Sioux Lookout. 26 in God's Lake, Norway House, and Thompson. 25 in Winnipeg, rain, and 27 for Dauphin. Showers and 23 in Regina, 26 in Saskatoon. Sun's out and 26 in Meadow Lake, rain, and 28 in La Ronge. Soggy across parts of northern Alberta, 27 in High Level, 25 in Fort Chip. 25 for Edmonton, showers, and 25 in Lethbridge. Sun's out and 23 in Vancouver, a sunny high of 32 for Kamloops. 24 in Prince George, 25 in Smithers. Rain and 14 in Old Crow, cloudy and 19 for Whitehorse. 18 with showers in Yellowknife and Norman Wells. 2 above in Sax Harbor, 8 with rain in Pawlatuck. 15 in Chesterfield, 16 in Arviat. 6 in Resolute, 8 in Joe Haven. Well, it took 20 years of negotiations, but the Mi'kmaq of Prince Edward Island and Parks Canada will establish and co-govern a new national park reserve. It's called Bi-du-umgek, which means at the Long Sand Dune. The park is a chain of barrier islands along the northwestern shore of Prince Edward Island. They form a significant coastal dune ecosystem, which is home to traditional Mi'kmaq culture with archaeological sites and unique geological systems. The federal government kicked in funding of $72 million over 12 years, which will help create the park and preserve the islands. Lennox Island Chief Darlene Bernard says co-managing the park will change tourism in the province.
We want people to come here and experience something. We don't want them to come here, buy a trinket, and leave. We want them to come here, and we want them to learn about the Mi'kmaq people. We want them to learn about our rich culture and our rich history, and this is what's going to attract people here. We're going to have a lot more visitors.
Beautiful looking spot. One day I will make it to the East Coast. That's all the time we have for your APTN National News for this Thursday. For much more, visit our website, aptnnews.ca. Be sure to join Creason here tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern Time for your first look at the news. I'm Dennis Ward. Marcy McGuitch, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you back here tomorrow.